This week on The Other Side, our final show for 2024, and we're taking a deep dive on the big question. Has Australia become a nation that is sexist against men? While the feminist movement of the last century sought to balance economic and political power between the sexes and give women much more choice, where has it left men? It does seem like Australia now has a culture where it's totally okay to ridicule men, make sexist jokes at their expense, even accuse them of crimes and assume their guilt before a fair trial. We have a family law system under attack by corrupted lawyers advising women to amplify domestic violence claims to get better results in family court later. We've villainised masculinity itself, not just the toxic bits. And we're experiencing a suicide crisis that hardly ever gets talked about, with around 50 Australian men taking their own lives every week. We will explore all of these topics this week. This has been the one theme of this show that sparked your interest the most this year, so we're jumping deeper into the fire for our final 2024 full episode. Join us now as we boldly go where so many media outlets fear to tread, because this is The Other Side. G'day Traralgon, g'day Wagga Wagga, g'day Australia. This is episode 338 of The Other Side, our final episode for 2024. I'm Damien Curry. We will be back for 2025 on Friday, January 24 for our first show of the new year. Our bias, we always declare it right up front, our perspective on the news is centre right. What we would call good old-fashioned everyday common sense Aussie values. And most importantly, we pay our own way with your voluntary support. And speaking of voluntary support, we will need much more of it in 2025 to keep going. We currently have around 100 paying monthly subscribers, members of the exclusive side. We need to reach 4,000 to keep The Other Side going strong right through next year. If you've gotten value out of the show in 2024, we really do need to ask for your support. Please head over to our website right now at othersidetv.com.au and sign up to contribute $5, $10 or $20 a month to keep this show going. We don't get any money from the government like the ABC to waste. We don't get a lot of advertising money because we aren't international and Australia is a small market, and we want to keep this show focused on Australia and Australian issues as much as we can. So more than any other show or channel, we really rely on you. If you like what we're doing, you think it's important for our country to have a show like this, please do help us out. That's othersidetv.com.au. Check it out. There's a story that I've been wanting to bring you since it happened back in late August, but with the elections and the news cycle this past few months being the way that they were, we haven't had time for it until now. A very important conference happened in Sydney 3 months ago called the Restoring the Presumption of Innocence Conference. It was put together jointly by two organisations, the Australians for Science and Freedom and Mothers of Sons, a group set up to defend young men who've been falsely accused of sexual abuse. The stories were chilling. It takes a lot to shock me, but the state of Australia's criminal justice system and media, insofar as men accused of sexual assault is concerned, is appalling. The bias is rampant. Men are assumed guilty until proven innocent in the court of public opinion and often in the courts of law, implicitly, if not explicitly. And even when an innocent man is found not guilty, his life is usually left in tatters, careers completely lost, reputation destroyed. Even if there are a few feminists watching this who are so sexist that they're thinking, well, I don't care what happens to innocent men, so long as we jail the guilty ones. Even if you're so far down the radical third wave feminist rabbit hole that you still think there's no problem here because you have an ingrained misandry, a disdain for men that makes you think, well, too bad then. Well, maybe you might care a little bit about the impact on the women around these men, because that's what we're going to focus on now. Craig McLachlan was a very popular Australian actor with a hit TV show on the ABC, a hit musical, and other ventures. When in January 2018, a joint investigation by the left-wing Australian media, the Sydney Morning Herald, The Age and the ABC, right at the peak of the Me Too movement, reported that McLachlan had been accused of sexual harassment by 3 actresses from the 2014 Australian production of the Rocky Horror Show, the stage show. Something seemed not quite right about all this. The actresses involved had all failed to win their parts back in a new 2018 season of the show. And Rocky Horror is a notoriously sexualised play about sexual promiscuity. It's hardly the sort of show where you'd expect the Sydney theatre scene people to be on their most holy behaviour. Now, I fully acknowledge what chaste, non-sexual, demure, virginal types the men and women of Sydney's artistic community are. But still, this was Rocky Horror. Anyway, McLaughlin responded at the time by saying that, quote, frankly, they seem to be simple inventions, perhaps made for financial reasons, perhaps to gain notoriety. In either event, they are, to the best of my knowledge, utterly and entirely false. But like so many falsely accused men, in shock initially and in complete disbelief, McLaughlin probably failed to grasp that the damage was already done. He left the 2018 production of the Rocky Horror Show, and the Victorian Police announced that they were going to investigate complaints from 2 of the women. Producers of the Dr. Blake Mysteries, the ABC hit show starring McLaughlin, for which he'd won a Logie, announced that production would be temporarily suspended, and the next April it was announced that McLaughlin would not be returning to the series. It wasn't until almost 2 years had passed that McLaughlin finally got his day in court. They used to say that justice delayed is justice denied. Not in the Australian legal system. We don't give a rat's how long it takes for an accused person to have their day in court and clear their name. Another full year passed for the hearing to be conducted, and finally the trial ended on the 15th of December 2020 with McLaughlin acquitted on all charges. Here's how Sky News Australia reported that at the time.
I think she's going to give me a smooch.
I am.
The award-winning actor has been found not guilty after being accused of indecently assaulting 4 women during the Melbourne production of the Rocky Horror Show.
We've maintained a dignified and respectful silence for the past almost 3 years and put our trust in the law. And here we are today.
13 charges were brought against the actor by 4 female co-stars, but the prosecution has failed to prove the allegations beyond a reasonable doubt. The 55-year-old maintained his innocence throughout the hearing, which began last year.
The following May 2021, Channel 7's Spotlight program claimed that the ABC had literally tried to put words in the mouths of McLaughlin's accusers when it interviewed them for the original accusation story back in 2018. ABC journalists were shown off camera to be appearing to coach the accusers by offering specific words to them like predatory and power imbalance for them to insert into the answers that they were giving. Now, of course, we all know that the ABC has been guilty of fiddling with stuff, especially lately with the new accusations this year about them adding extra gunfire shots and sound effects to a story to make our SAS soldiers look bad deliberately. When will it stop, and when will there be some accountability? Anyway, here's how Channel 7's Spotlight show in 2021 covered the ABC's manipulation of the McLaughlin accusers' interviews back in 2018.
Looking for a sharp, short, you said this is predatory behaviour, it wasn't a one-off, and when we all shared our stories, we realised how calculated it was.
I don't think we should be putting words into her mouth to an extent.
That I wrote down.
So essentially, what's of most concern is the power imbalance in this situation.
So I think what has inhibited our action previously and what's concerned us the most now is his... No, it's not.
Hang on, like that there. We can hear them. Okay.
We're good?
Move on.
What is it that stops women from complaining in these circumstances, do you think?
I think in our case, it's their star power, it's their influence that makes us fearful, makes us feel as though our voices won't be heard. Short enough?
With that?
Too short? No.
Maybe even just something like, he's a big star, he has clout. We wouldn't be listened to, or we didn't think we'd be listened to.
Okay.
Okay.
I guess we all felt that his star power and his influence was more valuable and more important than us.
Perfect.
Perfect, she says at the end there. That's the producer. Even the journalist, even the reporter doing the interview said to the producer, I don't think we should be putting words in her mouth. The producer said, no, that's what I've written down. She said that before. Okay. Sorry, that is not journalism. That is obscenely manipulative propaganda. Anyway, remember what the Me Too movement taught us. Believe all women all the time. If you don't do that, you are a rape apologist. But as I said, we're not going to focus on Craig. The Restoring the Presumption of Innocence conference, organised by Australians for Science and Freedom in August this year, began with Craig's partner of 15 years, the famed Australian opera conductor Vanessa Scannell, telling the story of how their family has managed this horrific ordeal since 2018.
In early October 2017, my partner and I were walking along a Sydney street when a good friend and colleague ran out of a cafe to greet us. 4 years earlier, my partner and this friend had performed together in a professional production of an iconic music theatre stage show. She hugged us, held our hands, and told us both how much she had loved working with my partner on a TV series over the past 2 years, a series which had just finished airing. She gushed, "It was the best time of my life." Only months before, she had sent my other half a photo of herself sitting on a toilet with her red underpants pulled down around her knees as part of a joke. I had also received a text message from her around that time. Oh, Ness, we were out of control together, not going to lie. We laughed and laughed. Hope you're wonderful, can't wait to see you soon. Kiss, 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 love, love, love. She left us on the street with more hugs and with a promise to meet up for dinner. 8 weeks later, on January the 8th, 2018, a story broke that decimated the life I once knew. 3 women from the 2014 Rocky Horror Show had gone to the press to accuse my partner of bullying, intimidation, harassment, and indecent assault in the workplace. Our friend was one of the 3 women. My name is Vanessa Scannell, and my partner's name is Craig McLaughlin. Today, I ask you to listen to me too, as I share my experience of what happened in the wake of that fateful day.
Vanessa went on to point out that most of us would be hearing her story for the first time because stories of accusation get lots of media coverage, stories of exoneration, not so much.
It's a story about mobbing, betrayal, abandonment and duplicity, but most of all, excruciating emotional pain and distress. The story I tell involves a movement that has eroded the cornerstone of the most basic of human rights, the presumption of innocence. As a tall poppy, Craig was an easy target when the requirement was to find a poster boy for the Me Too movement in Australia. Flirty, over the top, charming, funny, irreverent, occasionally seen in roles wearing next to nothing, as the characters demanded, and the clincher, a big personality. I'm here to speak of the carnage that is wreaked upon an accused person, their partner, families and friends, brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, when page 1 guilt is assumed, when fair process is relegated to second place, and when certain groups of the media and social media run public assassinations without nuance, care or humanity, let alone tested and tried hard facts and evidence.
Vanessa said that the believe all women mantra associated with the frenzy of 2017 still lingers and carries a dark and dangerous side when men are falsely accused. She admits that accusations of this kind are often complex, but they can also be used to promote fear and cause irreparable damage.
Fear because we are told we must believe. Fear because if you don't comply and publicly support accusers, you will be damned and cancelled along with the very people who have had allegations made against them. I'm not here to diminish the experiences of women who have been through untold pain and horror. I'm here to tell of my experience and to discuss the particulars of the nightmare in which I became unwittingly involved. There had never been a complaint made about Craig involving sexual harassment or indecent assault to the management, creative team or producers during the Rocky Tour of 2014, not in 2015, not in 2016. Not until the remounted show of 2/17/18, when the new cast was announced, when, coincidentally, none of Craig's accusers who had applied, auditioned or been approached were successful in being recast.
Vanessa went on to outline the way that the timing of the stories in the Sydney Morning Herald and the ABC seemed to be designed for maximum reputational damage.
One of the journalists said it all. Ultimately, we want him out of that job. These prophetic words were uttered before contact had ever been made with Craig, a journalist who had never met him or had directed a single question to him in relation to the allegations, but she had decided he was to be removed. The first communication we had from journalists was on January the 4th, 2018, when Craig received an email outlining broad allegations asking for his response. His accusers were not named. With horror and desperation, he asked the journalists, "Who are these people making such heinous allegations?" No answer was forthcoming. We had no idea as to who these people might be until 4 days later, when the story hit the press in the biggest showbiz way imaginable. Australia's golden-haired boy from Ramsay Street was obliterated. Front page and centre was our former friend, alongside 2 other cast members, with dressed-down doer appearances, in contrast with images of Craig in lascivious poses as the star of the show, Frankenfurter, complete with curled lip, corset, high heels, fishnet and lipstick.
That's just one example of how the news is constructed, folks, constructed by so-called journalists who are actually playing propagandists with a political position to push. I believe all news has some bias, but it's the job of journalists to aim to reduce it as much as possible. Opinion shows like this one should declare their bias, as we do at the start of every show, so you know the perspective they're coming from. And they should still strive to be reasonable and truthful in telling their stories like we try to be. It's bad enough that the 9 newspaper journalists did this, but the ABC that you pay for, that is bound by its charter to be as politically neutral as it can possibly be, being used endlessly day in, day out to drive left-wing cultural agendas of radical feminism, that is not okay, not one tiny little bit. Vanessa explains the results of the accusations against Craig were immediate and devastating.
Craig was cancelled from everything he was a part of. He stepped down from the Rocky Horror Show. He was removed from his hit TV series, The Dr. Blake Mysteries. Projects that were in the pipeline with various other networks vanished. Shows that he had appeared in and that were airing on TV at the time were removed. It became obvious that in the procuring of a scoop like this, beyond the demolition of the main target, there was zero thought for anyone who gets caught up in the collateral damage. In my story, there was certainly no consideration for any of the women in Craig's life. The contradiction is quite sickening. Society sees the arrival of a movement that fiercely sells itself as being all about women, but in the hunting and ultimate public slaughter of my partner, there was zero consideration for his 90-year-old mother, his nieces, his sisters. There was zero consideration for a woman like me.
We live in a time when allegations can wreck people's careers, and that cannot be allowed to continue. We must do better. Vanessa's entire speech is available on YouTube. Just search up Restoring the Presumption of Innocence and you'll find it. I urge everyone to hear her whole story, as we just don't have time to bring it all to you here. Joining me now is the founder of Mothers of Sons and the main organiser of the Restoring the Presumption of Innocence conference and Other Side regular, Bettina Arndt. Bettina, thank you so much for your time again.
Thank you, Damien.
The whole conference was really astounding. By the end of it, I was actually quite emotionally wrecked. It was just story after story of gross injustice. How did we get into this state, and what do you think we need to do to fix it?
Oh, I think it's been a gradual process, which is all to do with feminists taking over all our major institutions and having an enormous influence on the way our justice system works, the way the police operate, all sorts of areas, right down to boys being told to be ashamed of themselves as males in schools. I mean, it's everywhere. And, it's taken them a few decades, but they've got the whole system locked up now, which is pretty depressing.
It's insidious, the way that it's occurred. But we have reached a point where, and I mean, look, I get that Australia had a problem, and a lot of the Western world had a problem with, some inappropriate behaviour in the workplace, perhaps by a very small minority of men, really. Although a lot of women say they experienced it, it might not have been coming from a lot of men. It might have just been a narrow group of men. There probably was a little bit of a need for a cultural shift. And the Me Too movement had its moment, but it just went way too far and into this kind of witch hunt mentality where nobody seems to care how many innocent men are thrown under a bus, provided we get those guilty men.
Yeah, and guilty of the most trivial behaviour. The behaviour that can offend one neurotic woman, and that's enough. I mean, what makes me mad as a woman who's lived through the last half century of change is that, I grew up in an era of second wave feminism, which is all about celebrating our right to take responsibility for our own lives and make decisions for our own lives, and not to be needing to be chaperoned and protected all the time. And it's been incredibly annoying to see the feminists present us as eternally vulnerable and always in need of protection, and set up rules whereby one person who I see as often a very damaged individual takes offence at behaviour that most women wouldn't take offence at, and yet that guy, it ends up being totally destroyed by her accusation of harassment or whatever it is.
How do we get the balance right though? It's so difficult because you've got, women on the one hand, or a lot of the women in the feminist movement are saying, well, a lot of women are not coming forward, a lot of rape cases are not being reported, there's terrible things going on and there's no justice for women. And then on the flip side, you've got these horrible stories of men having their lives completely ruined. It seems like we're getting it all wrong.
Oh, we're getting so much wrong. And the thing is that most women are sensible. I mean, most women are mothers of sons. Women have men in their lives they care about and want to protect. And they don't want to live in a society where they're eternally at war with men. What makes me really mad is this is a tiny minority of women who are driving all of this. And we have to speak out. I'm very happy this week because I see the Trump election as really significant. And if you look at the figures there, women didn't vote for Harris. I mean, the vote for Harris went down. And I think it's all part of this woke world which is all about pushing identity politics, all about creating division between men and women. And I think that's one of the things that led to huge numbers of men voting for Trump and lots of women rejecting the push to vote for Harris. And I think it's really important, significant change, and we can do that too.
Yeah, it was great earlier in the month to see that change in the whole perspective as far as the female vote went also, but men now sort of standing up and pushing back a bit more. We seem to be a little bit behind that in Australia, I guess because, we don't have what they have in America, which is more balanced public debate, more diversity of opinion on television and in their public arena and in their public debate. We have this continued sort of suppression of any viewpoint other than the official woke left line in Australia. If you have Sky News or anybody who tries to rock the boat, they get condemned, they get ridiculed constantly, and we just don't see what we need to see happening in our media. Do you think we're going to see any change in the public discourse? Are the media in Australia starting to wake up to this, or is it going to be business as usual in 2025?
Well, I hope not. I mean, I think the mainstream media is utterly shameful in the way they deal with these issues. And we got no publicity for our conference earlier this year. They wouldn't touch it. Sky News wouldn't touch it. I mean, they will talk endlessly about identity politics, race, the trans issue, issues that hardly impinge on the majority of Australians, but they won't touch feminism. They're all utterly scared stiff of having this, to what I always say is a tiny lobby, go after them, because they're a powerful lobby, even if they're small in numbers. But we can turn this around. I'm really confident. And I'm just launching, about to get involved politically in doing a campaign to get rid of this appallingly anti-male Labor government and the Greens, of course, who have introduced so many new laws and regulations that are damaging to men and boys.
All right, Bettina. Well, you stay with us. We have another story coming up, and we wanted to get your thoughts on that as well. So we'll be back with Bettina Arndt on the other side in just a moment. Here at the other side, we do not get more than $1 billion of taxpayer money like the ABC does to waste on fun stuff that we and our friends like while ignoring the public that we're supposed to serve. We have to rely on your support of this show. But I also hate asking for charity. So we've done a deal with what I think is the best VPN service in the world so that you can support this show and get excellent value for yourself in return. Private Internet Access VPN is a virtual private network. You download their app onto your phone, your TV, your computer, whatever you use, and it'll route all your data through a different server location so that you can't be tracked by the prying eyes of big government and big corporations. It keeps you and your family truly safe, and it will not massively slow down your internet speeds or make it harder to use your devices like some VPNs do. Private Internet Access, PIA VPN, is quick and easy to install, and once you've downloaded it, that's pretty much it. You can sign up using our special Other Side code for less than $3 a month. Unbelievable. That is a whopping 83% off the normal price, and you'll get the first 4 months free, and you will be helping our show a lot. So get onto it, piavpn.com/otherside to get the special deal. And get this, if you've got a Netflix account, by signing on through a server in another country to Netflix, like the US, for example, you'll get access to that country's library of Netflix shows on your account as if you were in that country, which is also great if you want Netflix in a different language or something. piavpn.com/otherside. Far from seeing any step forward for the rights of men in Australia in 2024, any kind of post-Me Too, oops, we may have gone a bit too far, sorry, kind of reckoning, 2024 has seen feminists in our governments, bureaucracies and judiciary really take their activism to a new level. Men's rights activist Bettina Arndt writes that all it took was a little lobbying of politicians to get draconian legislation pushed through various state parliaments around the concept of coercive control, and that has resulted in unproven domestic violence accusations absolutely flooding our criminal law system. But domestic violence accusations are being abused to later get better results in family law court hearings. It's a problem that is resulting in fathers being alienated from their kids without a leg to stand on, and it needs an immediate fix. Bettina published an article recently focusing on shocking claims by 2 Queensland police whistleblowers and many others that she's received off the record, that they are being forced to enforce the law in a completely sexist manner that's biased in favour of women. While that used to be a problem before, now it's an even bigger one because of a trend that's seen a spike in women making false accusations or exaggerated accusations against men simply to get better results later in family court hearings. One Queensland police officer wrote to Bettina saying, "I saw something today that sickened me. A man came to the station after receiving a phone call asking him to attend a police station. He genuinely had no idea what it was all about. His wife had made a private application for a domestic violence protection order, DVO, which had been heard in court and a DVO put in place. He knew nothing about this." The police officer then goes on to say this about the man. He was visibly shaken. His eyes filled with tears. He quietly said, "I'm sorry, I'm having trouble processing this." "I advised him he urgently needed to seek professional legal advice," said the police officer. He was struggling not to break down and cry. The order had many conditions. He's not allowed back into his home, even though his office and work equipment is there. He can't contact his wife nor his 2 children except through a solicitor. I read the wife's application. The short version is that she wants to end the marriage and the man is having trouble accepting this. They had an argument over the fact that she's tearing his whole world apart, where he's alleged to have behaved badly, pointing his finger in her face and yelling, "I effing hate you." He then kicked over a watering can and the water went onto his wife's legs. Police attended and suggested that he should go and stay somewhere else, at least for a few days. The police officer's letter says, he left the home and a few days later told his wife he planned to return to their home. She told him he couldn't come back. She was terrified of him. Then she lodged the DVO application, based solely on what she says happened, no other evidence. I guarantee that this is going to get a lot of mileage in the upcoming family court matters. The police officer's letter to Bettina then goes on to say that, judging by the demeanour of the guy, I think it is unlikely that he is a hothead or violent. This matter stinks of a setup by the wife's solicitor. It is a malicious strategic move that was carefully planned and executed. Sure, I think it's very likely that he did what she said he did, pointed and yelled at her and kicked over the watering can. I absolutely do not condone his behaviour. But my God, the consequences are so out of proportion. He'll probably never get to spend time with his children again because her solicitor is now armed with this DVO, with him given no opportunity to prove his side of the story. The family law court will not give a flying you-know-what about the circumstances and how it came to be. Here is the smoking gun that shows that he is violent and controlling and potentially abusive to the children. I know that he is absolutely screwed and I feel sick to the core. Bettina Arndt is with us on the other side. Bettina, this officer's words are biting, but this is typical of the sort of stuff you're now seeing all the time, right?
Right across Australia, this is happening. I hear from police every week who are really unhappy about what's happening there. And so they have reluctant enforcers of unjust laws, and they know it. They know that if they go into a home and they assess it, that as the woman having been the one who was initiating the violence, that the chances are that even if they tried to get her charged, they wouldn't be successful. Our laws are being set up in such a way that you're not even allowed, the police aren't even allowed to do a proper investigation and make a decision for themselves. They have to look at who is most in need of protection.
Right.
That's the latest change in the Queensland laws, meaning even if you, one of the policemen gave the example of, seeing a woman bashing into the partner's windscreen of his car, breaking it. And even if you went in and saw that, you couldn't conclude she was the violent one because you'd still have to decide she was smaller than him, and therefore she was. What had driven her to it? He must have done something to make her behave like that, and she was the one most in need of protection.
Now, you actually interviewed 2 Queensland police officers for your podcast recently, and you disguised their voices and names, just calling them Paul and Lisa. And Paul was the officer who wrote you that letter that I read out. Let's just have a quick listen to some of what he said to you in the podcast.
I do acknowledge that there is a problem with domestic violence in society, and we need to deal with it. But it deeply concerns me that it's become a gender-driven issue, that it's pushed on us, that is always males that are perpetrating domestic violence and the males must be sorted out. I find that incredibly disturbing and upsetting, and it's incredibly unjust. Mm-hmm. To be honest with you, the thing that upsets me the most is, in the end, the consequence that I see that's most destructive is that fathers are often alienated from their children through the use of domestic violence orders. Mm-hmm. The orders become so powerful and have such a strong effect on men and on proceedings through the family law courts that men often find themselves in the position where the courts are saying, well, we're not sure that we should grant you permission to see your children. That's the ultimate injustice of it.
So fathers are being alienated by these DVOs, and Bettina, we've talked about this in the past. The fact of the matter is that the legal system has become quite corrupted around this. We've got family law solicitors actually advising women to make complaints, exaggerate complaints, even make false complaints in order to get a better result later in court when it comes to child custody and other matters related to the divorce.
Mm-hmm. And they can use really trivial examples. We heard, kicking over the watering can or yelling at a woman. A woman can say, I was afraid he would do something. You don't even have to have alleged he'd done something. Just simply fear can be enough to get a violence order. And then that carries enormous weight in family law proceedings. The Albanese government has a bill in place and going through Parliament to give even more of the assets, the family assets, to the domestic violence victim. So if she gets that violence order, she gets more of the assets. I mean, it's just incredible how we're incentivizing false allegations.
Yeah, well, there were two police officers that you actually spoke to. The other one was a female officer named Lisa. And she says she's seen abuse of domestic violence claims and orders for later benefit in family court. Exactly the same thing we were just talking about. She's seen that as well.
This man, he was guilty until proven innocent. And I'm sorry, but I always thought that in our country, it was the other way around.
Yep.
You are innocent until proven guilty. And with the extreme amount of impact that this can have on people's lives, I don't understand why it's being used so flippantly, why people are being allowed to use it as a weapon against their partners.
Do we need to outlaw and have penalties for lawyers who act in such an irresponsible manner? I mean, it's disgusting that we can't trust sworn legal officers in our nation to do the right thing, but this is happening a little too often. Should it be a crime to coerce a client into making an exaggerated or false claim against a spouse?
Yeah, we're actually looking into that and whether we can do something to punish, as you say, to have some sort of penalty for lawyers who give that sort of advice. Certainly they shouldn't be giving that sort of advice, but how we follow that through is another question. We're also looking at this whole system stinks. I mean, this is not the way our law is supposed to operate, that you can make an allegation with no evidence, which ultimately ends up with the man being put in jail. Because if he breaches that order, he could be sent to jail. How is this possible in a system where you're supposed to have evidence of a criminal offence? So there are possible legal remedies, legal avenues to challenge this whole system, and that we've got some very serious lawyers looking at that as well.
Now, that policewoman herself was in a violent marriage and she was a domestic violence victim herself. She had a husband with a mental illness and had to get herself out of a difficult situation. So she totally gets the risks. Here's a little more of what Lisa said.
I'm not concerned about women in relationships that are violent. I'm concerned about people in relationships that are violent. People are, and that is the biggest issue that I have with the way that things are these days, is that it's so gender biased. There's the investigation process is almost being taken away from us. It's not the person that needs protection, it's the person that we're going to look better for protecting.
So she's saying that they're not rewarded for looking after the person that needs protecting, but only the person that'll look better for the police force and the government to say that they're protecting, which is almost always the woman, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's worrying that we had to disguise those voices. I know it's a bit difficult to hear them, but that says something to me too. These police are too nervous to speak out openly. And most of the police even people who've retired for 15 years will say to me, I don't dare talk publicly about this. What does that say about our system? That to tell the truth about what's happening in our justice system means you put yourself at risk of what? The police say they risk of being locked up themselves, of false allegations being made against them, which end up with them being imprisoned. Everybody knows this is happening right through the system.
Okay, one last clip of Lisa from your interview I want to play. Here she is describing a situation where she and a partner were called to a job after a complaint from a woman. They arrived to find the husband pretty badly scratched up, yet very reluctant to talk about it. But when Lisa explained to him that if he didn't talk, then all that they would have to go on was what the woman said, then he finally opened up.
It got to the point where she was scratching him and digging into him and causing him injuries. And where it came to a head was he's pushed her and said, yeah, it was something like, get away from me, bitch. Oh, great, of course. But if somebody's scratching and assaulting and hurting me, I'm probably going to use more colourful language. But he just pushed her away, called her a bitch, and so she called police.
And what happened then?
So what happened is, from the investigation that I conducted, because in my opinion I conducted a holistic investigation, I determined that he was the person that was in need of protection. He was the person that needed to have a domestic violence order taken out to protect him. So I took her into custody. And the look of shock and horror on her face, and she literally said to me, but I called you, like that would make a difference. She was the person who had caused harm and violence and fear and threats to this man who was just trying to live, trying to do his thing.
Yeah.
That's pretty awful stuff. But Tina, how do these cases usually pan out when police officers do apprehend the woman and try to protect the male?
Oh, it's interesting. I mean, it depends. Sometimes you can get a violence order against a woman, but I've heard of cases where police have had prepared the evidence on that sort of case, gone before a magistrate, and the magistrates have refused to accept it and turned it around and charged the man, convicted the man. I mean, the magistrates are another story altogether. They're under such pressure to keep their heads down, to never attract any public attention and of course their biggest fear is that something happens to a woman who asks for a violence order and then, wasn't given.
Yeah.
And then they get, absolutely demolished.
Yeah.
And so magistrates uniformly are complying with this unjust system. I mean, from beginning to end, men are up against it.
Yeah. Okay, now all of this has been greatly amplified by these new coercive control laws that are being brought into almost every state by Labor governments across Australia. This is where it no longer needs to be physical violence that's at the heart of the problem, but just manipulation and control of a psychological nature. But wouldn't that be a negative for women perpetrators more, Bettina?
Well, it would if the laws were just, but they're setting up. I mean, I've mentioned, I think, to you before, David, the funny thing is, we're going to introduce these laws in New South Wales a couple of years ago, and then women's groups got nervous that women would be misidentified as perpetrators, and they held the whole thing up. They didn't roll it out for at least a year while they got police officers, female police officers, into police stations across the state to teach police to only charge men. And that is the way the law has been framed, and that's the very clear rule. The police know they have to only charge males. I mean, they can try to buck the system. I mean, interesting talking to police, because they will say, if I wanted to charge a woman, I'll be up against it. I'll have to, my superiors will put me through the ring, whatever the word is, Really make me jump all sorts of hoops. I'd have to justify it, enormous amount of paperwork, and you get a reputation for doing the wrong thing as a police officer.
Yeah. So it's really two-tier policing by gender. I mean, we've got one set of policing for men, one set of policing for women, different standards, two-tier policing, as they say. In the UK, they're talking about between the left and the right in the UK, or the woke and the not woke. But here it seems to be between male and female, right? That we've got this two-tier policing. It's quite scary stuff. We're going to be talking to Rob McMullen, a natural law expert, in the next segment of our show about the connection, I guess, between gender and politics, right and left and male and female. It's quite interesting. But it's fascinating stuff. Bettina, thanks very much for your time. A quick plug I know you want to give for your organisation and the great work that you do and you continue to do. It's amazing, really, your energy and that conference and how you keep the fight up with very little support. But on behalf of Men of Australia, I think I could say thank you for your work. Tell us a little bit about how people can get to you and see things.
Well, I mean, I have a website, and that will give you links to other things. I mean, the most important thing I would like people to follow is, firstly, my Substack. It's a big platform of writers called Substack, and if you put in my name at Substack, you'll find my blog, and that's where I'm not only exposing what is happening in Australia to men, but also calling for help with various campaigns I'm running. This political campaign I want to run for the next election, all sorts of things we can do to change the current dire situation for men and boys in this country. So please look at Substack. My blogs are free. I'm putting up more. I stopped doing YouTubes for a while. I'm now back into them, and I'll probably set up a new podcast very soon because I'm having so many people coming to me. I'm just about to interview a police investigator, police prosecutor, who was in the system for about 20 years, and he's telling me all his stories. Every week I have people coming from all over Australia wanting to talk about what's going on, and I can't resist exposing some of that to the general public.
Yeah, well, it's depressing to have to, and receiving all that, it's like you get overwhelmed and you want to help, but there's only so much that you can do, and you do a lot, and we really do appreciate it. Bettina Arndt, thank you very much. Have a wonderful Christmas, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, wonderful festive season, and we'll catch you next year on the show.
You too, David. Thanks so much for letting me on the show. It's pretty rare these days. I've been pretty much cancelled by mainstream media, and I do appreciate you giving me a voice.
You're watching The Other Side, your weekly analysis of the best news and commentary without the woke, and this is a very exciting and important end of year for us at The Other Side, because we've just launched our new website and a new way for you to support the show and help us keep doing what we're doing, and maybe even more of it in 2025. All you've got to do is go to theothersidetv.com.au and sign up for free, or better still, sign up to the exclusive side and support us for as little as $4.50 a month. That's not even the price of a small cup of coffee these days. And we really do need your support to keep us going and growing, because as you know, we don't get the $1.2 billion of money taken from taxpayers against their will to play with, like our Too Cool for School friends over at the ABC. What the hell do they do with all that money? That's what I want to know. That's othersidetv.com.au, othersidetv.com.au. And even if you can't afford to support us financially, please do sign up for free, as we can then still keep in touch if the information and e-safety police come after us. Othersidetv.com.au, our new website. Please check it out. Well, a couple of weeks ago, it was International Men's Day, November 19. But back in 2023, on International Men's Day, Paul Withall, the founder of the Zero Suicide Community Awareness Program, and a number of friends and supporters staged a massive visual symbolic rally at Parliament House in Canberra, with the placing of almost 2,500 shoes across the lawn. One for every Australian man who's taken his own life in the 12 months before.
One of these shoes is one soul, a man or a boy that took their own life last year. There's 2,455 shoes behind me. We need to acknowledge that men's suicide is not just mental health. We need to acknowledge situational distress when the three leading reasons for men's ideation is family relationship breakdown, loss of access to children, court and financial reasons. None of those are diagnosable mental health issues, and until we can recognise situational distress in men as the main cause of their suicide, nothing changes. We need a Minister for Men's Health and Welfare to start dealing with those three main reasons that men contemplate taking their own life.
I see the devastation that alienating behaviours and tools like restraining orders and false allegations, I see the impact on an extremely high scale. There's no support, and when they do reach out for support, they're often judged.
You know, we're losing like so many men in a week because they're programmed not to speak. It's important to me because I nearly lost my life twice because I was too afraid to speak. We look around and we look how many lives have been lost, you know, because men haven't been able to speak. They haven't felt safe, and we need to make men feel safe. When we share our stories, we make it safe for other people to share theirs.
You know, how can it not be overwhelming, you know? Some of the shoes up there have got photos in them. Some of the kids are so young, you know, that's a brother father, uncle, son, husband. It's just crazy, you know. It really hits home, and something needs to be done, you know. It's been like this for a long time, these numbers.
Now, look, it's a difficult conversation, but we've got to have it. And if you're feeling in any way like you need any kind of support at all right now for any reason, just Google Beyond Blue, or Lifeline, and reach out immediately, because there is help. No matter what, there is help. There is a way. You will look back one day and say, well, I'm glad I did that. And I realise now that I didn't need to be in that state. One of the main points, though, made at that rally just over a year ago was that a lot of men's suicide, the vast majority of it, is not a mental health issue primarily. It is for some. Some suicide, though, is, as I said, is the result of mental illness, causing a lot of pain, you know, generalised anxiety disorder or depression being so unbearable that people see the only way out is to, and get relief, is to take their lives. It is not, by the way. There are medications, there are many treatments, many ways of coping and living with pain, emotional and physical, and people have to do it every day, and they do, and they're the true heroes in our midst, that's for sure. But to speak of male suicide only as a mental health crisis is to deny something very important. As Paul said there, it is situational in the vast majority of cases, specifically caused by stress of relationship breakdown, family law injustice, alienation from children, or financial stress. And I, for one, am a little tired of hearing women and some men, although they may be well-meaning, saying that men just need to learn to, quote, get in touch with and express their emotions more. Expressing your emotions, your righteous anger at gross injustice and powerlessness and abuse and torture by a corrupted legal system is not going to help long term. Sharing the pain with others might ease the pain a bit. Having great friends and support around you might help a lot. We should never suffer alone or in silence, but we have got to get to the root problem, and fast.
We're here today to tell Aaron's story. Aaron took his own life in 2019. We've been unfairly treated by the whole legal system. We were let down as a parent, as a grandparent, even as his brothers were let down. The whole system let us down. The men need to stick together to fight for their rights. Women's groups do it a lot easier because women stick together easier. But as a mum, we need to put it in our boys' heads that they need to stick together and fight for their rights.
Men's groups cannot get funding, but women's groups can get funding very easily. That's why it's important, because we've got to stop this.
This is a serious issue. 2,455 men every year take their life. That is 2,455 men too many.
In Australia, we have ministers for Aboriginal affairs, our LGBTQI community, a minister for women. If we are all about equality, why don't we have a minister for men? At the end of the day, men's suicide has been 70% of all suicides for 40 years in Australia. You know, people have been calling for this minister for men for 40 years. I dead set, nothing's going to stop me. I feel this. This is my life blood, and I won't stop until we get a minister for men's health and welfare and situational distress is recognised as men's suicide.
That's Paul Withall, the founder of the Zero Suicide Community Awareness Program, speaking there on International Men's Day, November 19, back in 2023, amid their visual symbolic rally at Parliament House in Canberra with the placing of almost 2,500 shoes across the lawn. One soul for every soul. Joining me now, our very good friend of the show, man of deep thought and wise words, regular Other Side contributor and serious thinker and social commentator on men's issues, Rob McMullen. Rob, thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us. Appreciate having you here. Bit of a sad topic, but we have to address it. And I think the thing that we've noticed with the state of the criminal justice system at the moment, the state of the family law court system, the fact that we have 50 men taking their lives every week in Australia and it's just not getting the media coverage. You've got people like Bettina Arndt out there giving their all to get cover, and that just nothing happens. The big news organisations won't cover this story because they don't want to offend women. Women buy most products, most advertisers want to reach women. This isn't going to get better. Let's talk in practical terms. How do men manage this? How can men be more aware of the dangerous antisocial behaviours of some, not all, a minority, but the dangerous antisocial behaviours we see from women in these cases? What do you need to watch out for as a man?
Well, yeah, just to frame the discussion, we've talked a lot about, we do work in natural law, which is all about reciprocal cooperation, because the big picture is that men and women need each other.
Yeah.
We are different but compatible. We need each other. So many issues with men and women, it's like a chicken and egg scenario. But what is worth discussing is that, men and women are both people, women are people too, and as long as you're talking about human beings, there is a subset of those human beings who can express antisocial behaviours, a will to dominance over another person. The vast majority of people are great people who want great relationships, but there is that subset of both genders who do express antisocial behaviour.
Sure.
And what is worth considering, because it is very underappreciated in our society and culture and legal system, is the gender difference in when people do express antisocial behaviour. So most people don't, and we want people to have good families, good cooperation, good societies, etc. for everybody involved, but we all are very familiar with masculine antisocial behaviour.
Yes.
I say masculine and feminine, I'm not going to say men and women, because there's a bit of overlap there.
Of course, yeah. Some women are physically violent. There are some men who are emotionally manipulative.
Exactly.
But when you talk about masculine and feminine styles of behaviour, you're more talking in that sense.
Just the general archetypes, because they are generally...
and women do lean towards the less physical normally, and men lean towards the physical more.
Like any biological organism is going to make use of what's available to it primarily. And with men, because we generally on average have more physical strength, that's just one of the path of least resistance for us to express anger or dominance instinct. And luckily, our society has spent a long time suppressing masculine violence, and it should be like that because it's pretty terrible. I'm not even going to say it's equivalent to feminine antisocial behaviour, because masculine capacity for violence is extremely destructive. So it's good that we as a society suppress that. But there are feminine type antisocial behaviours that aren't as suppressed, and they are what's breaking reciprocity sometimes between men and women as well. So to give men a bit of some practical strategies, you want to be on the lookout for some of these things. That's what I wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
So, we've talked before about the feminine being more empathetic. And empathy is the ability to read the emotional state of another person and respond in kind. And so that gives rise to a phenomenon where more feminine people can tend to be empathetic amplifiers. And so one thing that's good for young men to remember is to maintain frame. Now, frame is control over your emotional state. And instead of, men kind of get baited and saying, well, you just need to express your emotions. I'm saying, well, maybe be a bit more stoic and trying to have control over your emotional state. Because the more empathetic people are going to see you more as you see yourself. And so what I'm saying is sometimes you can have the beginning of an emotional escalation. And if the man gets angry, then the woman can amplify that, and it can be the start of a bit of an arms race, and that can be the beginning of a bad incident. So,
okay, so all right, so you're saying maintain frame. This requires a little bit of Stoic philosophy, Stoic sort of traditional stiff upper lip British stuff, I guess. As opposed to the express all your emotions, the American sort of let your emotions out. We need to just let our emotions out, and we'll be better. That's not the case. So you do have to maintain a little bit of poise and resist that. But sorry, that last point that you just made there about women amplifying, just explain that for me a little bit more.
Well, sometimes they can be the feminine
amplifying
can be emotional amplifiers. If you're frustrated, they'll give it back to you 5 or 10-fold, and that can be the beginning of an escalation. So if you as maybe the masculine party there can learn a bit of stoicism, a bit of maintaining frame, you can really de-escalate a lot of situations. Because
so how do you maintain frame? I'm half Irish, mate. I get very fired up at times.
I think it's like going to the gym. It's a muscle that you need to train.
Yeah, exactly. Believe me, I've been training it all my life.
But it is important. I mean, nobody's perfect, but it's important to be able to do, because sometimes You can diffuse situations. No situation that you're dealing with is ever going to be optimally dealt with by letting your emotions take control of you. There's nothing that you can achieve better by being consumed by emotion.
So, okay, so what happens when you're getting triggered, though? Like, I mean, we hear all this talk about trigger, and we all know what that feels like. When someone just says something that just, like, I had a woman who came up to me the other day at the pub. We were celebrating the victory of the Republicans in the US. She was a Democrat, American, Australian PhD. She identified herself pretty quickly as that.
I'm very smart, don't you know?
Yes, I'm very smart, don't you know? And she came up to sort of say, I'm just curious. I'm just curious as to why some Australian men would be celebrating this. I just want to understand. And she was dripping in that passive aggression. She was dripping in sort of, you know, I could see that there was something going on behind the scenes there that she wasn't really coming up to try to understand. She was coming up to condescend, to patronise, to feel better about herself.
Yeah.
And I, to the horror of my friends around me, you know, told her to go jump in the lake. And this was not the day for that conversation that we were celebrating. We wanted to be left alone. And I might have been a tad rude. But it is hard in that moment. When you recognise this stuff and you start to realise, oh, hang on, they're being manipulated here, right? You do react. So that's when you've got to say to yourself, okay, I'm going to take a step back. How then do you deal with the other person, though, if they keep coming at you? Because she kept coming at me with, I won't ever try and understand again then. I tried to understand, you know, that sort of nonsense.
You've hit the nail on the head. The way you can train your stoicism or your frame is to be aware of the power dynamics, the manipulation, the passive aggression. Because these are what we're talking about. These are more typical in the feminine way to express antisocial behavior, to express a dominance instinct, is passive aggression, manipulation, that sort of thing. So
yeah, it's less obvious than the masculine sort of physical punch. We can all go, well, that's wrong.
Absolutely.
You shouldn't do that.
Absolutely.
You shouldn't have been violent. You shouldn't raise your voice. You shouldn't get angry. You shouldn't shout. You shouldn't yell. I've had that all my life.
Yeah.
And I've learned to control it over the years. But I'm not a physical puncher, but I am a shouter. And then, you know, but you get the feminine thing of the whole, you know, niggle, 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 and they're very good at it. Right?
So they are very good at it, and that's why we've got a list of points we want to touch on, because what I want people, you know, young men especially, to understand the points, to see it coming, to see the game coming.
Right.
And to know that it is a game, it's often a strategy and not going to be cooperated with. And so maintaining frame, seeing the game coming. You, at the end of the day, if you see games coming your way, or manipulation or undermining, you have to exercise your greatest power, which is your power to remove yourself from a situation.
Leave,
especially a dysfunctional relationship. But just to get down in the weeds a little bit more, so one way to verbally manipulate or sort of win an argument is very common with the feminine, is changing the point. Now, if you remember Jordan Peterson's famous Kathy Newman interview, so you're saying,
so what you're saying is,
so you're saying. And
by the way, that's a normal journalistic technique to say. We do it all the time in interviews because we're summarising what you're saying. We're taught to do that.
Yeah.
But she was using it in a different way. She wasn't just summarising. She was changing what he was saying.
There's a difference to trying to summarise or clarify to reframe.
Yep.
So, you know, if someone wanted to reframe this, they say, so you're saying that women are the cause of all this? I'm absolutely not saying that. And I've said it many times currently that men and women are both capable of antisocial behaviours, but we're just examining the differences. But that's a manipulative, a verbal and emotional manipulative technique. So you're saying, but then we get back to point one, maintain your frame, don't get triggered. And you have to stay on point. When you're trying to work out a disagreement, stay on point. Some of these things...
Or go take a walk.
Or take a walk or whatever.
Yeah, come
but
back,
the point is to just be clear about what you're saying and don't let it be reframed. Some of these things happen by accident because people get emotional, but then there's a slow gradient between it becoming a dominant strategy, something that the other person's all but consciously trying to manipulate you into. So don't fall for the so you're saying or reframing or putting words in your mouth too. And so once again, it's quite annoying for people to do that. So that can often be one of the smallest parts of an aggression build-up, of escalation. So don't fall into that, because then we get to the next point, which is often the feminine will try to bait you into direct aggression.
Okay. Now, we in our main show that this segment's coming from, we talked to Bettina Arndt about, and these police officers that came out and said, there are situations where women are baiting men deliberately. These antisocial women are baiting men deliberately in order to get the reaction, maybe record the reaction, as Stephen Crowder's wife, the American podcaster's wife did, record the reaction, use that in court, right, and get a result. So there's a lot of baiting, deliberate baiting going on by this very small segment of antisocial women to trap men. And you've got to be God, I'm grateful every day for the woman that I married.
Me too.
Absolutely. Me too. But yeah, I mean, these guys are in these really horrible situations with these very antisocial women, And
so once again, we'll say it again, vast majority of people are great people and want to have functional relationships, and vast majority of men are great people, the vast majority of women are great people, but some men are antisocial physically and some women are antisocial relationally, or passive aggressive.
So you're being baited?
You're being baited. So
Be
once
aware
again, back to number one, you have to maintain frame as best you can, practice that emotional stoicism so that you are not allowing yourself to be baited into a direct aggression. Like we had the case of the man that kicked over a bucket and the water fell on his wife's feet or something.
Yeah.
It's pretty scary that even such a minute thing like that
well, that was playing court as, I was physically attacked because the water splashed onto me.
I mean, that's ridiculous. But once again, you can see that she's consciously tried to bait him into anything that she can use to get the system to destroy him.
Yeah.
And so you want to be seeing, like you did, see the manipulation coming so that you can be free of it and see, well, you're running the risk of being baited. So don't react with direct aggression, because often if somebody wants to harm you, they can be baiting you into using something to weaponize that victimhood against you. And that's different to, say like an aggressive man who's just going to attack you himself. It's a different way to do it, and it's worth being aware, like you did, seeing it coming. You really want to see it coming. The next thing we want to talk about is the use of a mid-level aggression, and it's very related to baiting, is just by suggestion, by undermining, by baiting, just small level aggressions, whether they can be so you're saying or changing the topic or speaking to you in a horrible tone or speaking down to you. Usually the feminine is good at getting right below the line that it's obvious, so they can maintain plausible deniability. And the political left does this too. I mean, this was the original book called Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky, and now the latest iteration of this, Beautiful Trouble. And you see this with a lot of the Just Stop Oil protests or the climate protests. They do something that is a mid-level aggression. And so they set up a lose-lose situation for you, and this happens at the personal level and happens at the societal level. Whereas if you react overtly, once again, you're baited into direct aggression, they get to weaponize that victimhood against you. But if you don't do anything, you look weak. So at the level of the interpersonal, it would be something like if you're out with a partner and they belittle you in front of their friends, but they do it in a very sly way, and everybody kind of knows it was a bit below the belt and they're putting you down, they're placing themselves above you, but it's not obvious enough for them to take the heat for it. And that, people always make mistakes, but if that thing becomes a continual thing, you run this lose-lose scenario of saying, well, if you turn around and be directly aggressive because you feel like you were aggressed against, then you're the bad guy.
Yeah, right.
But if you do nothing,
you're a weakling.
You're weak, and everybody
and
loses
men really
respect.
feel that bind, right? It's like, if I let this pass,
absolutely,
like that situation I had with the woman on election night, back in the earlier part of the month, when I said, I started to fight back, and I probably didn't do it in the most calm way. I was firm and a little bit rude, and that put my friends were like, "Oh, that was a bit harsh." So I'm sitting here thinking, I said to my friend, that's necessary to push back, right? It's necessary to push back on these people with their passive aggression. You don't see the aggression, so the counter aggression looks more aggressive because they're being passive aggressive. You look outwardly aggressive.
Exactly.
And so you're in that double bind of like, well, I'm looking more aggressive. Now, that doesn't, you got to maintain your I should have maintained my stoicism in that situation probably a lot better.
Yeah.
But by the same token, what I did by pushing back was actually correct.
Yeah.
And my friends saying, oh, we would have just let that go through to the keeper, that's not okay either, right? So it's this double bind situation which can, well, it can drive people crazy. Double binds do that.
Exactly. Once again, we've talked about how the feminine and the left do social construction. They're very sensitive to social status. And men, because we don't think like that, we can be a little bit blind to these games. Hence why we want to talk about them, to not be so blind to them.
Yeah.
But if you're not being respected, if you're being disrespected, even below that level of it directly in a passive aggressive way, what that person's doing is chipping away at your social standing and chipping away at your respect in the eyes of other people. You don't want to put up with that either. And I've seen a lot of men, they call it being henpecked, and 20 years go by and he's got the couple of kids and he's fulfilling all his responsibilities, but the slumped shoulders and the lack of confidence and self-esteem starts to creep in. You don't want to be there either, because things are only going to get worse. A lot of these things escalate. So what you really want to do is to be able to see that strategy, the mid-level aggression. So they put you in, it's maintaining plausible deniability. It's right below that level of being direct, but you feel like crap, and because that's what they're intending for you. And if you overtly react, you lose. And if you let it go, you lose. So what you have to do is call it out. Like I said at the beginning, you can only think about this clearly if you maintain your frame, maintain your stoicism over your emotions, exercise your greatest power, which is your ability to withdraw yourself from that situation. That is your greatest power in this world, for a lot of people, but especially for young men too, is to say, I'm not feeling respected. I don't like the way you're speaking to me, that even your tone of voice, you may be frustrated, but we all have to be adults and we can't just take our frustrations off on other people. So I don't like that behavior. And if it's going to keep going, that's not part of my life. I'm going to leave.
Yeah.
That's the best thing you can do, is to see this.
All right, mate, we are out of time, unfortunately. I could keep talking about this for ages. So why don't we do that? We'll do another Side Extra episode in 2025, and we'll go through more strategies and more techniques.
Sounds good.
To get into it. But I just want to touch on a bit of that before Christmas. So
if people find that sort of stuff interesting too, follow me on Twitter. You hit the nail on.
Yeah.
Ask questions on Twitter. You know, it's the sort of thing you can talk about for a long time. But
and you're
hit
at
the nail.
the McMullen, the underscore McMullen, or
No,
just
just
the McMullen?
the McMullen,
And it's Mac or Mc?
MCMULLAN.
So just Mc.
Yeah.
Okay, the McMullen. Bye for now, folks. Thank you very much. You have a great Christmas, happy Hanukkah, happy New Year, and we will catch you. Thank you for everything in 2024. We'll catch you in 2025. See you then.